I'd really like to hear how you guys work with actors in an animated film. It's not something I've ever been near. I understand if you're on a set, you have actors, they interact with each other, they have a world to pick things up and put them down, but you're recording basically in a booth, right, for animation. How are you working with them, and what are you giving them to give them a sense of what they're supposed to be in front of?
Well, the one thing, you know, they will read the sides or whatever, you read the script. Their scripts in animation tend to be really all over the place because there's a storyboarding process, so the script sometimes isn't keeping up with the storyboard, and Chris and I write and direct it. So that's the nice thing, I think, is because unlike some things, as directors, we're not usually fighting the material because sometimes we like our material. But anyway, so we are usually trying to just figure out, let people know what we're trying to do and give them a sense of, you know, the world and where they are and answer their questions. But the really cool thing I think about, you know, directing an animation, especially for the actors, from their perspective, is that, you know, we are in no rush to get the shot. You know, we can sit there all day. We've got hours to work on things. So they actually become part of the process, and they start writing with us almost. You know, it's like they will come up with things. They will understand the scene, and they can keep on going because they're just doing they're not sitting across from an actor and just trying to go back and forth and getting their thing or trying to stumble somebody up. So it allows them to really dig in and become part of the process and pitch different things. And the fun thing, I think, is when they will pitch something and then we come back in the next session, which might be like, for instance, in the case of Nicolas Cage, who we recorded him in about 8 different countries over about 3 different years. I swear to God, it was the Bahamas, Bath, England, New Orleans, New York, Las Vegas, Los Angeles.
Glendale. And Glendale.
And what was really cool was that he could improvise, he could put things through, and then he'd be like, hey, what if I did this here? What if I did that there? And then we could come back and show him scenes that we integrated something. And he would know that, you know, his voice is part of the process as opposed to, you know, we've got 10 weeks to shoot a script and whatever we do here, then it's done. So I think that's kind of a really fun thing. It's like, you know, they really get a chance to be part of, you know, the writing process.
Well, like Emma Stone, for example, like Nicolas Cage has done this kind of thing before, and he's extremely good at it. With Emma Stone, I think this is the first time she ever did like an animated film, and so, you know, this stretches on for a couple of years, and so things really evolve. So what she'll give us, we'll come back to her like maybe in a few months, or, you know, say half a year later, and we have to bring her up to date with where the story is now, because the whole movie it changes right up until the last shot is lit, and then the paint is finally dry. So the whole thing is a living creature up until the very, very end.
This is an original story. This is actually the highest grossing original story of the year. Tell me the origin here. I know John Cleese was involved in the original story, which is always a good start with anything.
Yeah, for sure. I started writing with John. We'd written a script for Disney, and the folks at DreamWorks had read it and said, oh, this is really great. Well, you come over and look at some of the stuff we're doing. And one of the things they had was sort of just a one-page kind of idea about something made in the Cavemen era and what they were trying to do thematically. And the part of what interested John and myself, but was a big interest to John, was the fear of technology and the fear of change, because he has a very, very healthy fear of anything changing. So we started working on that, and we were working on it actually at Aardman. It was meant to be a stop-motion movie, but then DreamWorks and Aardman stopped working together in about 2005, and the project went to sleep. And then it didn't start back until Chris came from Disney in 2007, and that's when we started working on it together.
Exciting.
You know, it was just the Cavemen. There are 2 things I love when it comes to. I will see any movie with submarines or cavemen, and I love them both,
Croods too.
no matter what. Cavemen underwater, it's the ultimate movie for me. The caveman thing was so attractive to me just because it was so wide open. Like, you can do whatever you want, and there's something about cavemen that's universal. One of the first things that Kirk and I did early on working on this movie, we ended up here in New York City, and I went to the American Museum of Natural History for the very first time, and we went and we made our way down to the wing that has early man, and before you got there, you heard kids and teenagers and they heard all this noise, and you went in there and people were just captivated by the stuff in those cases, the little reproductions, the models, the skulls, and there's something about cavemen that everybody gravitates towards. There's a simplicity, there's just an honesty to it. One of the things about working on the Croods that I was looking forward to and that we did achieve, and there's many, many things to talk about, but I'll limit it to this one just for a moment, which is there's no society to shock. So if if a caveman gets scared or upset, they can just be really upset or really scared, and they can act out, and there's no one to shock. They won't get there's no repercussions. They won't lose their job because they had a fit. You know, they threw a fit about something, and it's just that one of the things about the Croods I really loved is that they're super honest. There's no duplicity. They can just, like, what they're feeling, they can be at any moment. And so it's kind of a freeing, kind of cathartic thing to think about that and imagine living that way.
Yeah. You were telling me outside your feelings about animation and what it gives you, and it seems to lend itself particularly well to that sort of expression.
These family members going on this journey and seeing things for the first time, one of the things that made me love animation as a kid is that it has the ability to captivate you and to say things so clearly and honestly and timelessly. There's just something about the medium that has an honesty and an immediacy and a poetry to it that things tend to be timeless in animation if you do them well. So little moments in the Croods, like when they go up to the top of that tree and they see the night sky for the first time, that was a landmark within the story that for me kept me going. Like, there are a lot of confusing days and tedious things along the way, but imagining that moment finished kept me coming to work on time every day, making sure that we were going to get to that moment, because that to me was magic.
So Roger Deakins who was one of the great cinematographers, Coen Brothers movies, etc., was your visual consultant. How do you work with him?
We worked with him for the first time on How to Train Your Dragon, and with that project and with ours, it was all about reducing the number of lights in the shot and trying to find something that was stronger. I think just more powerful. One of the things in animation, when you finish a scene, if there are no lights in the scene, it'll just be blank. Lights are moved into our shots just like you would move them off of a truck. They're virtual. And one of the things that Roger early on was very, I think, interested and captivated by was the idea that, like, there could be a scene with two characters facing each other, and you could have a light right in between them, but you don't see the light. The light hits them, but the light source is invisible. So he thought that was really pretty cool, because he actually, for the first time, he put lights inside the shot, and light from inside the shot. But we get together with him, like, right at the very beginning, and we just talk about everything. Like, it's a bit like working with Alan Silvestri on the music. What's the vibe of the film? What's the look of the film? What do we want to get across? In the case of the Croods, for example, there is no locked off shots. Yeah. Any shot is handheld. And we actually have a room in the studio that we can do camera capture. After a shot is finished, we can hold a virtual camera, and we can film the shot again and again and again to get a handheld look to it. And so there's a documentary sort of vibe that we wanted to very subtly inject into the film from the beginning to the end. And so, like, he knew that, and he lit appropriately. And so he would always advise us on our shots, the angles, the lighting, and we would get together with him no matter what the sequence would be, at the beginning and at the end, and talk about where it is and what we could do to enhance it and to simplify it and to make it a little bit stronger.
How did you guys divide up your responsibilities as directors, as co-directors?
We didn't really divide up anything. One of the things, the only thing I could say we divided. The only thing we divided.
They're writers too.
Yeah. The thing that we divided. We work on the outline together. And so we know what the intention of every sequence is. When it came to writing the sequences, we divide that up. So he'll be across the table from me working on, like, the family landing in the forest in the New World for the first time, and I'll be working on something maybe in the cave. And so as long as we know what the intention of that scene is, it will fit into the outline. I won't write something like Kirk will, and he will not write something like I will. So one of the things that was actually kind of fun about it and that kept the energy up and kept it really fresh is that when he shows me his pages and I read them for the first time, it's not how I would have written them. But I'm like, wow, this is really cool. This is kind of a neat angle on that scene. And you make, adjustments and suggestions and stuff. But that's probably the only thing we really divided.
Let's just stick with it.
And then other than that, like, we went to every meeting together. You saw the film. You see how complex every shot is. And these are handmade shots. They're like every shot is the equivalent of building a 747 or, like, building a cathedral. There is so much detail in them, and I'll be looking at one part of it and concentrating on this, and then Kirk will comment on, like, of something over here that I didn't even see. And so having two sets of eyes on every shot all the way through the process is actually a really good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's enough work, and a lot of times what we're doing is, we have to go from department to department and explain what we're doing and to remember what we're doing, because some people, they don't, down the pipeline and in lighting, they're trying to figure out what's going on in story. So we have to constantly be re-explaining what we're doing. So it's always good for two people to be there, because you forget things and you're also knowing things. And the one thing that Chris does, which is storyboarding, is extremely, extremely helpful, because there be sequences in this film, in particular, and me coming from writing, that would only be this big in the script, but it would be this much screen time. And so Chris, being able to storyboard, could storyboard that moment and show it to the executives, and we could show it to everybody, and they'd be like, oh, I get this. And if I wrote it, it would be like, Grug paints in a cave. Nobody likes that, They're like, what? Really? You can't do better than that? Yeah, but so.
Another reason it's good to have two directors on one of these things, people always ask the question, how do you direct an animated film? Because certainly we're not sitting in that world and having everything around us. Imagine a movie set where you took every single discipline and separated it. So recording the actors, the acting is two things. We record the actors, and that's the first time that we are working with actors. The second time is when we actually distribute the animation to the animators, and we're repitching the scene and repitching what we need out of every single shot. And they're the second set of actors to hit the shot. Then our lighters, the people who move the camera, the guys who will be doing the lighting and stuff like that, and not lighting, but what was the other one? Camera, lighting, the layout guys and stuff like that, they're all, and the model builders, they're all, imagine those all separated. And so we'll go in any one scene, we're going to pitch that like 6 times to 6 groups of people and try to get the same message across to everybody. And then if any of those groups of people has a slight little angle on it that we need to like carry to another department, we become the living repository for that story. And like, if I fell down and hit my head in the staircase, the film would look different because I forgot something that somebody told me on the way to another department and stuff like that. So yes, it was like, imagine it all separated and just being a lot more like time to get it all together. When I came onto the film, it was a very, very different story. It was actually a whole village full of cavemen when I arrived in the story. And it was this whole village full of cavemen, and there was the idea that this sort of new modern caveman, which later became Guy, was going to arrive and then bring fire to them, and then he was going to be kidnapped, and a couple of the cavemen would have to go and find him and bring him back. And that big village was very Flintstones-like, and it was really fun to work on. And there was no time that we worked on this film that there wasn't something really cool that you could get out of it. And that's the kind of stuff that can become a bit of a sand trap, because we worked on that. I worked on that with Kirk. We scripted it. I even storyboarded a huge bit of that with that whole village. Guys go out on hunts and stuff like that. And it's like, oh my gosh! And every time we showed it, people would laugh, and it was entertaining. But the movie, it's hard to explain this part of it. The movie never really got off the ground. It was like a big, huge airplane that would taxi down the runway, but it would never lift off. And after 1 year, they came to me and they said, do you want to go and work on How to Train Your Dragon? And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. And not that I wanted to, abandon Kirk to this, but I sort of did. I sort of abandoned him to it. And I was like, well, good luck with that. And I thought the whole thing was just kind of going to go to sleep while I finished How to Train Your Dragon. And Kirk called me up within a couple of weeks, and he'd been alone just thinking about it. And he said, I have something to pitch to you. And I came back down to the room, and he said, forget the village. Forget all these characters. It's now one family of cavemen. They lose their cave, and they go on the world's first family road trip to find another one. And on that journey, they change. And I didn't have to even think about it for a second. I was like, you did it. That's it. And I knew that was going to fly. We both did. Because it was just suddenly, it was a concise, simple idea that had immediately, there was a lot of emotion that was attached to that notion. But it takes a lot to take everything you've been working on for like years and just like, I'm going to push it over a cliff and start again. It happens a lot in animation, actually, now and then.
I do that in my life all the
time.
time.
Yeah, it happens all the time. You just want to start over.
But it had a lot to do with what happened was really when we were working on it, the village scene, we'd have like the 2 guys would go off and do a buddy comedy movie, and you'd just be doing that, and it'd be kind of the same old thing. But the best scenes, the best thing that I loved and what we loved was the fact when the dad would talk to the daughter, but then the dad would go off on an adventure and the daughter would be back, and then he'd come back and be like, you can't believe the great adventure I went on. You're like, oh God, here it comes. All right, tell her all about the adventure. So we're like, I was like, that's it. we're bringing the daughter along, we're bringing the grandmother along, we're bringing the whole family along so everyone could witness it. So that the embarrassment is higher for Grug when he's going through things, but also that they see him changing. And it means more to them, you know, and that was the biggest thing. It's like, we were sitting there going, why doesn't anybody do ensemble family comedies in animation? Then we made one. We're like, that's why they never do it. It's hard. Because it's only 8 people in this movie, but they're on screen all the time.
I've worked on Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, Mulan. Mulan had the highest, I think, body count of any film I've ever worked on. We had whole, like, the imperial cities full of people. And oddly enough, when we started this, I thought, oh, finally, a movie with only a couple of characters. It's going to be
an indie film.
Really easy. It's going to be simple. And the problem is actually Croods was the highest, I think, number of actors or characters I've worked with in a film because they were all in every shot, every single moment of the film. And so 7 people just choreographing them through a shot became really kind of difficult. And we actually have a very interesting thing at DreamWorks. It's unique to DreamWorks. We have a camera capture stage downstairs in the basement. We do not use that for animation. That's all done traditionally with animators that are starting from scratch. But what we do use that room for is to rehearse scenes and record the rehearsals. And that became vital on Croods. The scene in the cave, when Grug gets his family in the cave after that whole hunting thing, and, you know, just figuring out where everybody is standing. It looks simple up there, but when we would try to storyboard it, you were having trouble just keeping track of the characters. So we would bring every one of our animators down that was going to lead each of those characters, and we would work through the scene. And that became something that I really looked forward to, is that there are so many things that happen on this film every day. For like 2 or 3 hours, we would go into that room, and we'd shut the doors, and we would just work on that one scene. And we'd talk about who's standing where and what they're doing, and the scene, again, would inevitably change because we were down there and having that concentrated time with our animators, our actors, trying to figure out where everybody's going to be. And that became something that was a very like, worthwhile tool that came along just in the nick of time for our film. My motivation, you know, Belt was a prop that became a star, and that can only happen in animation. When we first designed him, he was actually a piece of Guy's costume, and we started talking about, like, well, should people understand whether he's even alive? And so we put little tiny controls in Belt so he could open his eyes and smile once in a while. And then right before we finalized it, we thought, you know what? We should be very careful. We should put enough rigging inside of him so just in case he has to move, he can move around and stuff like that, which turned out to be a very, very wise decision because, as it turns out, there are things here and there that Belt did for us that, like, really kind of saved the day. Because he's the only character up there that operates under cartoon conventions. He produces things like umbrellas from nowhere. He's just like, I've got an umbrella, and like, he just boom, and it doesn't even bother you. You know, if another character did it, you'd be like, wait, how could he do that? But he somehow is able to do that, and we just had to feel that out. The whole thing came. That whole thing came out because we were sitting there talking about, like, the big disaster. There's no villain in this film, which makes it unique. The villain is the changing world. And we want to indicate that there's a disaster that's chasing the Croods. But when we boarded it, we wanted it to be different every time it showed up so that there'd be kind of a fresh thing. So sometimes it's an earthquake, sometimes it's a plume of lava, sometimes it's actually a rift that breaks open and stuff like that. So we're always trying to make it different. And then eventually we thought, are people going to understand that that's the same thing? It's the same one? And we thought, why don't we name it? And so we were just in the middle of a meeting, and we said, you know what? You know, Belt should sort of name it. He should go like, I don't know, like da da da, like da, da. That's the one. There it is again. It's like da. There he is. You know. And so we said, like, we'll just make him go da da da. And so I went down to editorial, and they're like, here, just do it. And it took 2 minutes. Like, they set up a microphone, and I went dun dun dun. And the real magic happened when we went to Skywalker Ranch, and Randy Tom, our sound designer, took that and did his thing and made it sound not like me. And then it was like, oh, and then it became a thing, and it's like, oh, people like that. We'd never record an actor without having a little camera on them, just in the off chance that there's something that they do that we want to bring back to the animators. And that happened a lot, in particular with Emma Stone. She is like a cartoon character. Like, she is a very, very animated person. In fact, I was so fascinated by what things she was doing. At one point, Kirk and I sat down, we were going through some of these takes that we thought were particularly cool. And there were a couple times she changed expression in one frame. She would go from like really happy to dad. And like she would like suddenly be like what, you know, and she would change so quickly that we doubted that the animators could do it that fast that it would feel believable. And the other thing that she did that's very hard to explain, she would occasionally smile, but the corners of her mouth would be turned down. And it's very hard for me to explain that. Like, you just have to, we puzzled over it with the animators. Like, can we do that? And they were like, yeah, we can do that. But they were like trying to figure out how to do it. So we always bring reference back from those recording sessions. And occasionally while we're doing the takes, we'll like write down like, okay, circle this one. Let's show like James Baxter or Line what they did.
The cool thing about doing the Caveman movies, we could do anything we wanted. And the scary thing was we could do anything we wanted. So it was always like, where do you start? And so one thing was we were going through all creature designs, and we start with all those things. And what happened was we were like, well, we have to make it anime. You just can't do this. You can't just make it straight. So everyone just started putting like tusks on everything. So it'd be like tusks on mice, tusks on insects. So we're like, we can't.
It's the first place you go.
Yeah, just put tusks on everything.
Tusks on everything. Saber-tooth everything.
And then somebody combined two creatures, and like that just took off. We were just like, you know, maybe this is the way to do it, and sort of make it like, and it made sense thematically. We were like saying, okay, these are all like the Croods. They're evolutionary dead ends. You know, these aren't getting out alive. Like, these things are not going to work. And so the fun part of it is just trying to figure out how these creatures. And we looked at it, and it would be that weird little dial, because sometimes people would meld two creatures together, and it'd be like too science fiction. Or they do it together, it'd be like too Seussical. So it was like, what was perfect for us? And then at some point, we'd be like, okay, that's a Crood creature. That could make it. And it just opened up the world. And the other thing that helped us, I think, for that, storytelling-wise, is that we needed, the hardest thing about this movie was making people empathize with Grug, because he's a character who comes across with a lot of rules, and he's, you know, stern, and he's tough.
He's very negative. His job is to be negative in the movie.
Yeah, and we wanted it to be believable that he would be afraid of everything. So if the audience was in the same place as Grug was, which was like seeing things for the first time, and he doesn't know. When you see a mouse come up, you don't know if it's going to eat you or not. When you see a bird come up, you don't know. It helped, I think, just to put the audience and Grug in the same place and looking through his eyes. So that was the, you know, the fun part, but also the integral part for the story.
Kind of a big job. The other reason that we made all the environments, we tried to make every single environment a little bit unusual. We wanted it always to read as like planet Earth, but one of the reasons we tried to, like, one of the scenes looks like an ocean that has just been drained. And it's like all these giant coral formations are out there in the sun. And one of the reasons to continue that whole thing, we wanted the audience to be in the same place the Croods were. So when the audience goes to every different sort of level of this film, you don't know. It's like, is this going to be a fun place, or is this going to be a super dangerous place? So you wanted to keep everybody as unsure of what was going to go on and on the edge of their seat as the Croods would be. The funny thing is, we did actually consult some paleoanthropologists at the very beginning when it came to the characters' movements, because we were looking for like subtle cues to keep them from being just I don't know, like too human. We wanted them to be more believable as cavemen. But, you know, we had a couple of decisions to make very early on. And first of all, yes, do not base your book reports on this film. You'll get in huge trouble. You will be in trouble. But one of the things we had to decide was we didn't know from the very beginning, like, okay, when we started from scratch, cavemen is wide open. Do we even want them to talk? Are we going to are they going to talk at all? Are they going to have a language that we won't understand, so it would be a little bit more like Quest for Fire? Or are they going to speak English? And if they're going to speak English, should we invent a language? Should we bring a linguist in and create a new language and stuff like that? And it all came back to story. Like, this story was all about a caveman who was overprotective for a lot of really good reasons. And he's going to come to the decision at the end of the film, you can't protect your family from everything. Risk is a part of life, and that he was going to go from being an overprotective guy to being somebody who's going to push his family into the unknown. And the reason we wanted to tell that story is that it's a universal story that actually relates to everybody today, because it's going to happen to everybody. You're going to go from having a kid or being a kid, having to get out there in the real world and stuff like that. And because that was a very, very complex and subtle thing, we just decided, you know what? These cavemen are going to be like the Flintstones. They're going to be able to talk, like full, nothing unusual about the language. It's going to be, plain English and stuff like that. And because the story was so subtle. Now, that said, we did have to police ourselves all the way along the line. we watched out for words that kind of stuck up too much. Because of course, Grug early on says, let's put on the brakes. Well, there's no brakes. He's just, everybody, I put on the brakes, I get it, That word, for example, it didn't kind of stick out too much, but there were words along the line that were like, we better take that one out. It sounds too modern. There's references to time and stuff that we should take out, calendars, things like that. Take those words out so it doesn't bump you out of the film. Because, it is a fantasy and stuff like that, but yeah, the message of the movie dictated a certain thing for the look of it and how they would talk and stuff like that.
The good thing about having an ensemble comedy with a family, is that there's a lot of family stories to be told, and this was a big father story. This was about fatherhood, and this was about, but there's still, other members of that family that can have stories, so we feel like we can find a good one and really involve everybody, just like we did in this one. More work for Cloris.
More work for Cloris Leachman is always a good thing.
Always a good thing.
All right, well, thank you guys so much, and thank you everyone for coming tonight.